All right, welcome everyone. Have you ever put together a strategic plan, looked it over, and just had that nagging feeling that something crucial was missing? Well, if that's you, then you're in the right place. Today, we're diving into a book that doesn't just give you a new plan, it gives you a completely new way to think. We're talking about The Art of Strategy by Dixit and Nalebuff.
You know, most strategy books, they kind of have this fundamental flaw. They paint this picture of strategy as this heroic solo journey, right? You're at the bottom of the mountain, you look up, you analyze the terrain, and you map out the perfect, most efficient path to the top. It's all about you and the mountain.
And this is the part they almost always forget. In the real world of business, you are absolutely not alone on that mountain. There are other climbers, your competitors. And guess what? Some of them are actively trying to cut your rope. Your perfect plan is totally useless if it doesn't account for what they are doing.
So, here's our syllabus for today's little masterclass. First, we're going to expose that big blind spot in most strategic thinking. Then, we'll dive into what it really means to think in games. After that, I'm going to give you a little professor's reality check on these ideas. Then, the fun part, we'll look at some incredible case studies of winners and losers. And finally, we'll wrap it all up with how you can actually put this stuff into practice.
This is really where the art of strategy just changes everything. The authors, they're not here to give you a 5-step checklist. No. Instead, what they do is they hand you a pair of X-ray glasses. They teach you to see strategy not as a monologue, where you just stand on a stage and announce your plans, but as a dynamic multiplayer game, where every single move you make is going to cause a reaction.
So let me ask you this, and be honest with yourself. Think about the last big strategy you worked on. What percentage of it was based on what you wanted to do, and what percentage was based on anticipating what your competitor would be forced to do in response to your move? Because that difference, well, that's everything.
Okay, so let's get into the core curriculum of the book. This is where we learn this whole new language, this new logic for seeing the business world. It's all about moving past just looking at your own hand of cards and starting to think about what everyone else at the table is holding. Now listen, if you only take one single thing away from this whole explainer, please let it be this. The #1 cardinal rule of game theory is to look forward and reason backward. It feels counterintuitive, but you don't start with what you're going to do today. You start by figuring out the best possible endgame, and then you work all the way back to find your best first move.
So here's how this plays out in the real world. Standard thinking on a product launch is, okay, we'll launch at $50, our features are way better, people will love it. But backward induction thinking, that's a whole different ballgame. It says, hold on, if we launch at $50, our competitor has to match that price, and we both end up in a price war, killing our margins. So knowing that's their inevitable reaction, is $50 really our best first move? Or is there a move we can make that they literally can't copy? See, you've already outthought them before the game has even begun.
Okay, next up is probably the most famous idea in all of game theory, the prisoner's dilemma. And it's famous for a reason. It's this brilliant, kind of tragic little story that explains why two perfectly rational, intelligent players can end up in a situation that's terrible for both of them, even when they're each trying to do what's best for themselves.
Now just look at how the logic of this trap works. Put yourself in prisoner A's shoes. If prisoner B stays quiet, what's your best move? Well, you confess and you walk free. Okay, now what if prisoner B confesses? What's your best move then? It's still to confess because you'd get 5 years instead of 10. So you see, no matter what the other guy does, your best individual move is always to confess. Both prisoners follow that exact same logic, and they both end up with 5 years. It's a disaster compared to the 1 year they'd each get if they could have just trusted each other.
And this is a perfect model for the classic price war. Just picture two gas stations on opposite corners. They would both make a ton more money if they just kept their prices high. But that temptation, that little voice that says, hey, if I just drop my price by a few cents, I can steal all their customers, is just too strong. So one does it, the other has to follow, and pretty soon they're in a race to the bottom, and neither is making any real profit. That's the prisoner's dilemma in action. The system itself makes it rational to defect, even when everybody involved knows cooperation would be better for the group. So how do you get out of these traps? Well, the escape hatch is something called a credible commitment. Now, this is not just saying you're going to do something. It's not a promise. It's an action that is so costly, so public, and so irreversible that everyone else at the table knows you have no other choice but to see it through. It's the strategic equivalent of burning your bridges behind you so there's no path for retreat. And history is just filled with these. You have Hernán Cortés literally burning his ships on the shores of Mexico to tell his men there is no going back,
We win or we die here. Think about a price match guarantee. We think it's for us, the customers, but it's not. It's a credible signal to competitors that says, don't you dare start a price war because I will match you instantly and you will gain absolutely nothing. Or when Airbus wanted to take on Boeing, they spent billions building a massive factory, a huge, costly signal that screamed, we are in this for the long haul.
Okay, time to put my professor hat on for a minute and give you a bit of a reality check. Because as elegant as these models are, I can't in good conscience tell you they're a perfect reflection of the real world. The real world is messy, and it's really important to know where this beautiful, clean logic can get a little bit muddy.
So here are the 3 big weaknesses. First, game theory assumes everyone is a perfectly rational, calculating machine. But we all know people are driven by emotion, by ego, by pride, by fear. They make mistakes. Second, the models assume all the payoffs are crystal clear, like years in prison. In business, you almost never know exactly what a certain move is worth to your competitor. And third, these simple 2-player games are great for learning. But a real market, that's more like a 10-player chess match where everyone moves at once. So think of these models as the foundation of the house, not the whole building.
All right, enough theory. Let's get to the fun stuff and see how all this plays out in the real world, where there are billions of dollars on the line. These stories really show what happens when companies get the game right and what happens when they get it catastrophically wrong. The Netflix versus Blockbuster saga is an absolute masterclass in game theory. See, Netflix didn't just decide to play Blockbuster's game better. They invented a whole new game. Blockbuster's entire world was built on 2 things: physical stores, and most importantly, making a ton of money from late fees. Netflix used backward induction. They knew Blockbuster could not get rid of late fees without completely gutting its own business model. So by launching with no late fees, Netflix brilliantly turned Blockbuster's biggest assets, all those stores and their profit engine, into giant sinking liabilities. And then they did it again. A few years later, when the movie studio started to squeeze them on licensing fees, Netflix made another game-changing move. They made a massive, credible commitment by pouring billions of dollars into making their own original content, like House of Cards. This was a huge, irreversible signal that said to the studios, hey guys, we're not just your customer anymore, we are now your competition. It totally changed the power dynamics at the negotiating table. Now, let's talk about a failure. A really, really big one. This number right here, $1.75 billion. That's how much cash investors poured into a short-lived streaming service called Quibi, which completely collapsed in about 6 months. And here's why it failed, from a game theory perspective. Quibi made one of the most fundamental errors you can make. They completely misidentified the game they were in. They thought they were playing against Netflix and Disney+, making these high-production, bite-sized shows. But the game they were actually playing was for a few minutes of your downtime on your phone. And in that arena, their real competitors were TikTok, YouTube, and Instagram. Their user wasn't choosing between Quibi and a feature film, they were choosing between Quibi and an infinite scroll of free, addictive, user-made content. Quibi basically built the world's most beautiful, expensive chessboard and placed it right in the middle of a soccer stadium. They were playing the wrong game entirely.
So look, this is so much more than just interesting theory to talk about. This is a practical, powerful toolkit that you can use the next time you have a big decision to make. Let's break down exactly how you can start applying these ideas, like today.
Here it is, your 4-step checklist. First, always map the game. Who are all the players, really? What do they actually want? What are their payoffs? And what are the rules, spoken and unspoken? Second, always think at least 2 moves ahead, using backward induction. The goal isn't to make a great first move, it's to make the first move that leads to the best possible endgame. Third, look for ways to build trust. Try to turn one-shot, zero-sum games into repeated games where cooperation becomes possible. And fourth, when you have to compete, make damn sure your moves are credible. Back up your words with costly, visible, irreversible actions.
You know, in the end, I think the greatest gift this book gives you is that it completely shatters the illusion that you're operating against some static, predictable marketplace. You're not. You're in a living, breathing game with other smart, strategic, and sometimes totally irrational players. This book doesn't give you a treasure map with an X on it. It teaches you how to read any map, even while that map is being redrawn right in front of your eyes.
So I want to leave you with this one final thought to chew on. In your own industry, what's that one unspoken rule of the game that everybody just follows without question? What's the late fee in your world? And more importantly, What would happen if you were the one to make that big, credible, game-changing move to break it? Really think about that.